The courtroom was unusually tense for a Tuesday morning. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but you could feel the heat of scrutiny seeping through every marble crack in the walls. Prosecutors shuffled papers. Reporters whispered theories into their phones. But the spotlight was unmistakably on one woman standing at the plaintiff's table, Pam Bondi. Wearing a crisp gray suit and an expression that didn't waver, she stood up as Judge Edward Chen called the session to order. Bondi's presence had raised eyebrows. No one had announced her official role in the case yet. Rumors swirled, but in Washington, rumors were just noise until proven otherwise. Bondi cleared her throat and raised an objection during the opening testimony. Objection, Your Honor. The line of questioning is speculative and prejudicial. Judge Chen blinked once, looked down at his bench with an amused smirk, then chuckled. Ms. Bondi, he said, drawing out her name like it was some sort of inside joke. This isn't a cable news debate. We have real procedures here. The courtroom laughed politely with him, eager to stay in his good graces. Bondi didn't flinch. She calmly took her seat again, glancing briefly at the man beside her, an older official from the DOJ, who gave her a subtle nod. Judge Chen leaned back. Let's continue. As I said, but before he could finish, the lead federal prosecutor stood. Your Honor, she said carefully, before we proceed, there's a matter of clarification regarding Ms. Bondi's standing here today. Judge Chen raised an eyebrow, tapping his gavel softly. Go on. The prosecutor turned to the bench. As of this morning, Pam Bondi has been appointed by the Department of Justice as the new special counsel in this investigation. The room went dead silent. Judge Chen's smirk vanished. Judge Chen's posture stiffened. His eyes darted from the prosecutor to Bondi, who now sat with quiet composure, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She didn't have to. The new what? Judge Chen asked, his voice just above a whisper, though the microphone caught every syllable. Special counsel, the prosecutor repeated. Her appointment was finalized and signed by the Attorney General this morning. Effective immediately, she has full jurisdiction over the federal inquiries related to this case. The silence in the courtroom thickened. Reporters stopped typing mid-sentence. Legal clerks froze, mid-note. Even the bailiff looked confused. Bondi slowly stood back up. If it pleases the court, I'd like to reassert my earlier objection, this time, as special counsel. Judge Chen opened his mouth but said nothing. The laughter he'd shared moments earlier now echoed in his own ears like a haunting misstep. He knew what the appointment meant. She outranked everyone in the room, possibly even him, depending on the investigation's direction. Yes, Chen stammered. The objection is, sustained. A few heads turned. The DOJ official behind Bondi scribbled something into a small notebook. Judge Chen tried to collect himself. Then, we'll proceed, Ms. Special Counsel Bondi. If you'd like to take the lead. Pam stepped forward slowly, setting a folder on the podium like she had all the time in the world. Gladly, Your Honor. But before we continue, I'd like to address a few discrepancies in the court's handling of this matter, starting with the irregular sealing of key documents last week. Judge Chen blinked. Sealed under national security guidance. Which I now have clearance for, Bondi replied sharply. And which I intend to unseal, pending review. The judge's jaw clenched. This was no longer his courtroom. The courtroom remained silent, all eyes now locked on Bondi as she placed a fresh stack of documents onto the podium. Her tone was still calm, measured, but every word cut sharper than the last. Your Honor, the sealed documents in question pertain directly to procedural inconsistencies and unexplained omissions within the initial filings, several of which bear your signature. Judge Chen's fingers tightened around his gavel. Are you implying misconduct, Special Counsel? Pam met his gaze. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating that certain actions require review. My role now obligates me to evaluate all potential conflicts of interest that could compromise the integrity of this investigation. A quiet murmur broke out among the spectators. The court reporters' hands moved faster. One of the federal aides whispered into the ear of the U.S. Marshal near the rear exit. Judge Chen leaned forward. This court has functioned according to standard legal protocol. If you wish to challenge that, Pam raised a hand gently, cutting him off, not out of rudeness, but from authority. With respect, Your Honor, this is no longer about preferences or personalities. It's about transparency. And this court, under your watch, has failed to disclose key communications between defense counsel and third-party contractors tied to federal funding. Judge Chen turned pale. Bondi continued. We've traced several of these communications through secure channels. My office is currently working with the Inspector General. I suggest full cooperation going forward. The gallery gasped. Chen tried to speak, but the words didn't come. Not this time. Not after realizing the courtroom wasn't backing him anymore. Pam turned slightly to the U.S. Marshal by the door. I'll need the digital logs from last Thursday's restricted hearing. Unredacted. The Marshal nodded and stepped out. Bondi returned her gaze to the bench. This isn't personal. But from here on, we do things by the book. Judge Chen finally leaned back in his chair, a look of disbelief overtaking the arrogance he'd shown earlier. And just like that, the power dynamic in the courtroom had flipped completely. Judge Chen sat frozen, eyes fixed on the woman who now controlled the room he once commanded. The very mention of the Inspector General had sent ripples through the courtroom like a distant thunderclap before a storm. Pam Bondi didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone had become the storm. Special Counsel Bondi, Judge Chen finally said, his tone more restrained, if you're suggesting that I've tampered with the record, I haven't made that determination yet, she replied evenly. But I am reviewing all activity connected to this docket, including private meetings that were neither logged nor disclosed in accordance with federal protocol. Bondi reached into her folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. This is a formal notice requesting the court to preserve all communications related to this case. Any deletions or unauthorized access to judicial logs will be treated as obstruction. The room was dead silent. A legal bomb had just been placed on the judge's desk. Chen took the envelope slowly, his fingers noticeably trembling. He glanced at the deputy clerk, who was now watching him more than the proceedings. He knew what that meant. Bondi turned toward the bench, pacing gently. Furthermore, I've requested that a federal oversight panel begin an independent review of courtroom conduct from the past 90 days. If there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to worry about. A reporter in the back gasped quietly. Another one slipped out the door to call their newsroom. Bondi's tone remained composed. The people deserve justice without interference. And if shortcuts were taken to protect anyone, on either side, this investigation will expose it. Judge Chen tried to steady himself, but his authority had already cracked. He looked less like a judge, and more like a man waiting to be judged. Judge Chen shifted in his seat, as though the weight of the bench had doubled. The leather of his chair creaked under him. Gone was the smug confidence from earlier. Now, every eye in the courtroom watched him not with respect, but scrutiny. Pam Bondi remained composed, but her focus sharpened. Your Honor, she said, her voice unwavering, do you deny meeting privately with members of the defense team outside of scheduled court sessions? Chen hesitated. That's a serious accusation. It's a documented inquiry, Bondi replied. Phone records and visitor logs from the courthouse security office already raise questions. The judge's jaw flexed. I'm allowed to speak to attorneys. Ex parte conversations are not permitted when material to the outcome of a federal investigation, she finished for him. Especially when those conversations are not disclosed to opposing counsel or placed on the record. Gasps. Again. Judge Chen looked toward the federal prosecutor seated nearby, but the woman didn't move. She wouldn't shield him. Pam continued, now opening a file and holding up a printed photo. This image was taken in the garage entrance of this courthouse. That's you, Your Honor, entering a black sedan registered to a lobbying firm tied to the same defense network under investigation. Judge Chen's face went blank. Someone in the gallery dropped a pen. Pam placed the photo on the evidence table without comment. She let the silence stretch. Finally, she spoke again, this time slowly. This court is no longer merely presiding over a high-profile case. It's part of it. And I intend to treat it accordingly. Judge Chen's hand twitched near the gavel, but he didn't use it. He couldn't. Before Judge Chen could utter a word, the double doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. The U.S. Marshal returned, carrying a sealed case file and a flash drive. His face was unreadable as he approached the bench. Special Counsel Bondi, he said, addressing her directly. Per your request, unredacted surveillance logs, full timestamp index, and restricted chamber entry reports from last Thursday's hearing. Judge Chen turned pale. Bondi nodded and took the materials without flinching. Thank you. Please remain in the courtroom. The marshal stayed where he stood, now more of a watchdog than an escort. Pam turned back to the bench. Your Honor, these files are now part of my preliminary review. I'll be submitting them to the oversight panel by close of day, but you're welcome to examine them first. Judge Chen didn't move. He stared at the flash drive as though it held a match to his robe. Bondi continued. Contained within are two anomalies. 1. An unscheduled entry into chambers at 7:42 p.m., logged under your credentials. 2. A second entry 18 minutes later by an individual with no official clearance, carrying a satchel. Now, Chen did move. He sat forward, his knuckles whitening as they gripped the edge of the desk. I don't recall, he started, but Pam cut in. That's the problem, she said coolly. You should. Her voice never rose, yet the impact landed like thunder. The gallery knew something irreversible had just taken root. Pam stepped back from the podium and turned to face the room. This court has a choice, she said. Cooperate and restore integrity, or resist and risk the consequences. The reporters wrote furiously. The federal attorneys sat in frozen silence. The only sound was the low hum of courtroom lights buzzing above. And for the first time in his judicial career, Judge Chen found himself not presiding, but being watched. Judge Chen's fingers twitched near the gavel, but he didn't reach for it. He knew if he did now, it would look like desperation, a final attempt to reassert control that had already slipped away. Pam Bondi stepped aside as a federal clerk approached her, whispering something into her ear. She nodded once, then addressed the court again. For the record, she said, holding up the flash drive, this will be duplicated and sent to the Office of Professional Responsibility. The original surveillance data confirms that unauthorized access occurred, and it's connected to sealed evidence being mysteriously withdrawn from this court's archive. Judge Chen opened his mouth, but again, no words came out. His silence said more than any defense could. Pam turned her focus to the gallery behind him. There's more, she said, her voice clear and resolute. Financial logs obtained this morning reveal a transfer, substantial and unreported, to a private account in the Cayman Islands. An account tied to a family trust under your name. Gasps erupted. Even the stenographer stopped typing for a moment. Chen's head dropped ever so slightly. The dam was breaking. Pam didn't smile. She didn't gloat. I've already issued a referral for forensic audit and will request the judge recuse himself from further proceedings until the inquiry is complete. The courtroom was still, suffocating with tension. One of the federal prosecutors finally stood. We second that motion, Your Honor. Judge Chen looked up, his eyes bloodshot. I need to consult counsel. Pam nodded calmly. You'll have that opportunity. Then she turned toward the marshal. Please escort Judge Chen to his chambers. He is not to leave the building until instructed by the oversight team. The marshal approached the bench. This time, Chen didn't resist. He stood slowly, robe dragging behind him like a shadow. The once unshakable judge walked out of his own courtroom under someone else's authority. Pam turned back to the room. "We'll resume shortly, with impartiality." As the heavy door closed behind Judge Chen and the marshal, a ripple of breath spread across the courtroom like the end of a long-held exhale. The man who once mocked Pam Bondi's objection had just been removed under silent compliance, his power revoked not by force, but by fact. Pam remained at the front, steady and composed. She didn't move to sit down. She didn't relax. The room was still under her command, and she wasn't finished yet. "Let the record reflect," she said, turning to the court reporter, "Judge Edward Chen has been temporarily removed pending official review by the DOJ Oversight Panel. Until a substitute judge is appointed, this courtroom will enter recess under sealed conditions." One of the assistant U.S. attorneys spoke softly. "Special Counsel Bondi, will you be assuming interim procedural oversight?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "Under emergency authority outlined in Title 28, I'll be overseeing all case-related matters until a neutral judicial officer is designated." No one objected. Pam stepped down from the podium and turned toward the gallery. "For the record, I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came to restore trust in a system people are starting to doubt." The silence spoke volumes. Even the reporters, usually quick to shout questions, waited respectfully. Pam gathered her materials with clinical precision. "This isn't about politics. This isn't about personal vendettas. This is about accountability, at every level." She turned and walked toward the back of the courtroom. But just before reaching the door, she paused and glanced over her shoulder. "This court belongs to the people. And I intend to return it to them." Then she exited, leaving behind a courtroom forever changed. By the time Pam Bondi stepped into the hallway outside the courtroom, the building was already buzzing like a shaken beehive. News had spread faster than official channels could manage. Phones rang in every corner. Staffers whispered into earpieces. Reporters sprinted toward the exits, racing to file headlines before the rest of the country caught wind of what had just happened. She didn't stop. 2 DOJ agents flanked her, clearing the path. A third handed her a secure phone with a blinking light. "The Attorney General is waiting on line 2, the agent whispered. Pam took the phone. "Yes, sir. It's done. The logs have been recovered and the judge has been removed pending inquiry." No pushback. He was stunned. Completely. She paused, listening. "Understood. Yes, I'll prepare the preliminary report for committee review within the hour." She ended the call and handed the phone back. Then she turned to the agents. "I want all related court records digitized and backed up. Twice. And pull surveillance from the private parking garage, go back 30 days, not 7. I want to know who else met with him." One of the agents nodded and peeled off down the hallway. Pam moved with quiet intensity. She had crossed a threshold few were ever willing to approach, challenging a sitting federal judge and surviving it. Not just surviving, but exposing him, piece by piece. Now came the second phase, the cleanup. Behind her, the courtroom had been sealed. Clerks were interviewed. Logs secured. The oversight panel was en route from D.C., and by nightfall, Chen's chambers would be under formal lock. And yet Pam wasn't satisfied. She'd seen the look in Chen's eyes, there was something else. Something he hadn't said. Something he was still hiding. And she would find it. It was nearly midnight when Pam Bondi stood alone in Judge Chen's private chambers. The room smelled faintly of cigar smoke and polished mahogany, too elegant for what it now represented. The walls were lined with legal volumes no one had opened in years, and the desk was cleared of anything useful, except one drawer. Pam motioned for the DOJ tech beside her. The hard drive? He handed her a labeled device, freshly cloned from the courthouse server. Everything's here, emails, calendar entries, encrypted messages. But there's something you'll want to see for yourself. He pulled up a screen on the nearby monitor and opened a hidden folder buried behind 3 layers of password protection. Private, Chen, comm logs. Pam leaned in. Play the audio. A recording crackled to life. Chen's voice, calm but unmistakably him, she doesn't know yet. Bondi. They haven't told her. If she finds the sealed addendum, we'll have to shut it all down. I don't care who signed off, she's not supposed to be in this deep. Another voice responded, muffled and nervous, we thought they'd assign someone easier to control. They didn't, Chen said flatly. The audio ended. Pam stared at the screen, then slowly sat down in Chen's leather chair. The full picture had just snapped into place. Not only had the judge tried to obstruct an investigation, he'd been part of something deeper. Coordinated. Possibly criminal. She opened a clean notepad and wrote a single line, recommend full criminal referral, obstruction, conspiracy, breach of oath. Then, in her steady, deliberate handwriting, she signed her name, Pam Bondi, Special Counsel. The building was quiet now. The chaos had turned to calm. But beneath that calm, a reckoning had begun. And Pam Bondi, once laughed out of a courtroom, was the one holding the pen.